Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Robert Ginsberg, and he is a near-death experience researcher. And Robert, can you tell us how you got into this?
Well, our interest and my interest is not necessarily only in NDEs, but in all evidence that supports the premise that we survive our physical deaths. We're heavily involved in the mediumship world. Of course, a lot of scientists on our board are research near-death experiences, end-of-life experiences, deathbed visions, reincarnation, after-death communications, electronic voice phenomena, and the boot. So our purpose is to educate the public about the whole body of evidence that suggests that we're a lot more than our physical bodies.
So were you studying something else before you studied this, or just?
No, I mean, 20 years ago, if we were having this conversation, I would be looking at you with a questionable eye, saying, because I believed that we were our brains, and when our brains died, that was it, and death was final, and I couldn't see any logical explanation for continuing. I didn't know how that could occur. After the death of my daughter in 2003, there were a lot of unexplained phenomena that kept happening. My wife had a premonition and a vision the morning of the accident that she knew something horrible was going to happen. And then eventually that spurred my interest to try to find out, A, if my daughter did survive in some form, and B, was she okay? And I took the science route because I was a kind of a left brain thinker, and I met with various researchers and medical doctors that studied consciousness. At the same time, we became familiar with the spiritual community, and we formed the Forever Family Foundation, which is a convergence of the two, science and spirituality.
Now, did you create that out of the grief you and your wife experienced the loss of your daughter? And I know your son was seriously injured too, right?
Yeah, he was, and obviously I was in a state of shock for a month or two because I didn't know whether my son was going to survive, and he did. And after he started to recover, I remembered the premonition that my wife had the morning of the accident. She got up at 3:00 in the morning, trembling and shaking, and she said something horrible is going to happen today. And I then became obsessed with trying to find out, how she knew. But to answer your question, yeah, at the beginning we were searching for, as any bereaved parent would do, for some ways to deal with the grief we were experiencing. We found a support group that was made up of all bereaved, parents. And Phran and I, my wife, had already we're doing some exploring into the nature of the afterlife. So at the support group, every time that either me or my wife would bring up the subject of an afterlife, the moderator would shut us down and said, no, this is not, we don't discuss these things here. This is a group to teach you ways to cope with your grief, and those subjects are off limits. And we looked at each other and we thought that was odd, because what we found is that every single parent in the place, the only thing they wanted to talk about was whether or not, there was an afterlife and whether their child could survive. And we used to stand out in the parking lot after the meeting and hold our own discussion. And then we said, there has to be some forum, that people can feel free to discuss these things without the fear of being labeled or judged and so forth. So we decided to start these discussion groups across the country, and gradually the work progressed to, we formed the foundation, and now we're a worldwide organization, we're over 11,000 members, and it just shows you the interest that people have. People are questioning their own mortality, especially in the age of the pandemic that we're living in now. So there's a quest for this knowledge, and that's what keeps us motivated and going.
So you've been doing this 20 years?
Well, we started the foundation in 2003, and recently that we in the foundation were featured in that Netflix docuseries, Surviving Death. Netflix actually happened to, we allowed them to film at one of our grief retreats. So now the interest is, tremendous. I mean, we're heading out to California Thursday for a retreat out there, and we're trying to hold as many as we can. But we find those retreats to be remarkable because we can see the tangible results of somebody who comes into the retreat and they could barely speak because their grief is so heavy. And then at the end of the retreat, there's a lightness and there's some smiling and joking and so forth. And we hope that stays with them.
What episode on that program is that you're
on episode 4.
Okay.
Yeah, of Surviving Death. And I guess we're in the last, last 30 minutes or so.
Okay.
The nature of film and television is that, Netflix filmed, by my count, well over 75 hours with between, individual interviews and the retreats and so forth. And the reality is that those 75 hours, 30 minutes of content, because that's the way it is, So, I mean, on the one hand, is a little disappointed they couldn't get more in there, but, we were grateful that it exposed a lot of people. I mean, there's, the first episode deals with, near-death experiences. The last episode deals with reincarnation. And then there are a couple that deal with mediumship.
So do you have like an actual retreat, like a place you own that people book to come?
No, we go to retreat centers and hotels. I mean, the original one we've been holding it for 10 years in a retreat center in Connecticut. It's a wonderful setting, but we couldn't replicate that any place in the country, at least not at prices that people could afford. So we also hold them now in hotels, which seems to work out because they rope off like an area of the hotel just for our use. So it's kind of private. And these are not huge things. We limit attendance to 50 people because we want them to be intimate and we want people to get the most out of them. And we have mediums there that have been certified by our foundation, and we have grief professionals and metaphysical practitioners. At our last retreat, we had a near-death experiencer, and so forth. So we try to give a well-rounded, we take a well-rounded approach, to grief, and mainly people find information helpful in their grieving process.
Well, if you know anybody that wants to start one in Long Bottom, Ohio, I have a 9,000 square foot home that's empty.
Oh,
We raise a
really?
lot of kids. I'm like, maybe I could turn it to a retreat.
You could.
But who wants to come to Long Bottom, Ohio? The nearest airport's Columbus, is 2 hours away.
Yeah, well, that's when you plan these things, that's one of the challenges. You have to make it accessible to people by plane or by, people come in from all different parts of the country and other countries.
Is this once a year thing?
We hold 3. Right now, we're holding 3 a year, one in Connecticut and one in California and one in Florida. But, I'd like to expand them. It just, we're an all volunteer organization. Nobody gets paid. Our resources, we don't have a lot of.
So you have one in Connecticut, one in California. Where's the other place?
And one in California, that's this weekend. That's in San Jose area in Silicon Valley, and one in Fort Myers, Florida, and then another one in Chester, Connecticut.
Connecticut.
We may add more, in the future if we have the manpower and the resources to do that. But right now we have 3 per year. But we have other things. We have we have webinars. We have a radio show we do once a week. We do recommended reading and all sorts of different platforms for people to have as a resource.
What's the name of the radio show?
Signs of Life Radio. There's a link to it on our website, familyfoundation.org. We've been doing it since 2005, and every single show is archived on our site. So the chances are, if you read a book or you talk to somebody and you want to learn more, we might have interviewed them over the years, and you could just pull that show up and listen to it.
Are most of the people you interview people that's experiencing grief, or what are they?
Mostly scientists, researchers, medical doctors, authors, mediums, anybody connected to the world of survival of consciousness, and we have in the foundation several different boards. We have a scientific advisory board made up of MDs and PhDs, and we have an academic advisory board, which have professors on them, and we have a medium advisory board too, of mediums that have been certified by our foundation and serve on a board. And we've been conducting a medium certification program since 2005, which some scientists helped me develop, and we evaluate the evidence that mediums provide under controlled conditions. And it's very rigorous. Only 10 to 15% of the mediums that we've evaluated all those years have gained certification, so it's kind of an elite club. And I recently wrote a book called The Medium Explosion. And the reason I wrote the book is because for that very reason. We live in a world today where the media has a lot of exposure, not only with the afterlife, but with mediums. And you see mediums popping up on every corner. And
Right.
great many of them can't do what they claim, so I try to teach people, what to look for, how to evaluate a medium, and, the cold reading techniques that some mediums use and so forth. So that's been a good resource over the years. People have, at least they have some reliable source that they could turn, because where do you really go if you want to find a medium? There are no regulatory bodies or proficiency panels or ethical guidelines. And, you or I could just say we're a medium and start practicing and charging a lot of money tomorrow,
Right. We were just talking about that yesterday on another podcast. How I have friends that never said they were psychic or medium. And all of a sudden one day I see they post on their Facebook, I'm a psychic medium, send me your credit card, $100. I'm like,
Yeah, I know, it's true. And, we all have intuitive ability to various degrees, and, sometimes somebody has an intuitive experience and they mention it to a friend, and the friend says, wow, that's really, you should be a medium, in just what you described. The next, a month later, there you hang out a shingle, Jane the medium, and start charging money. And, mediums, I try to point out that mediumship is very, very serious business, because they're on the front line sitting with people that are in very, very fragile states, also people that are sitting on the fence about whether they believe in an afterlife or they don't. And if they go to an inexperienced or fraudulent medium, they're going to walk away from that in worse shape than when they came, convinced that all mediums, are frauds, or all mediums can't do it, and there is no afterlife. So we urge people to be very careful before you choose that as a profession.
I've heard a lot of NDEers say, well, I didn't know I was a light worker, or I don't know, some of these terms, until a medium told me. And I didn't know that I was reincarnated 7 times and I was once this and once that, till a medium told me.
Right. And it gets, I hear you, and it gets worse than that sometimes, because, somebody, just the way you described, they go for a reading with a medium, and during the reading, the medium says to me, wait, I sense that you should be doing this work. You're very intuitive. And then lo and behold, what happens is that the sitter takes classes with and pays that very medium, to be in their classes, So I don't mean to be overly skeptical, but there's a lot of motivation that goes behind that not necessarily for the greater good, more from a business perspective.
I think people need to know that and hear that, because there's such an awe factor right now with near-death experiencers. And some people, I see it in the NDE groups a lot. Oh, you had an NDE, and they'll post a picture of their dead child. What are you seeing? What are you getting from this? And they're all commenting, or they'll ask questions that only God could answer, but they're asking these questions and some people are answering as if they're God and have the answers to everything. So, and people need to, have that common sense. Now, should a person ask a medium first, are you certified?
Well, that's difficult because there's really very few places that offer certification. I mean, we've been doing it since 2005. There's the Windbridge Research Center that also, they're not doing it anymore, but they did for many years, evaluate mediums with using scientific protocol. And there are many common mediums that are on both of our lists. But, then you have some people and some organizations, it's sort of like becoming a reverend. You could send in your $10 and you get a certificate that you're and go out and, then start, practicing. So there are some that, they just charge a fee and they're not legitimate, so there aren't a lot of places. We have a seal, and once somebody is certified, that they can post that seal on their website, and we maintain a list on our website. Nobody can pay to take place, to take part in the process, and they can't pay to be listed on our website. I mean, no money ever exchanges hands. So there are some legitimate organizations, but there really is no central, certification body that people can resort to. The problem that we have is that over the years, many of the mediums that we've certified have gone on to become famous. And what happens when somebody becomes famous? They do fewer and fewer readings. They have longer and longer waiting lists, and they charge more and more money. And that sort of defeats the purpose of having a resource for the bereaved if you can't afford or get a reading with them. So we're looking to certify a lot more mediums that are more accessible to the public, and at reasonable prices.
Years ago, I was looking for a stay-at-home job, and I come across Psychic Medium. It was Psychic Network. It was one of those popular ones, and I thought they would go through testing. Like, I was like, well, could I be tested? I thought they would test me. What else I got to do, And no, they was pushing me through right now. And they had a headline about me that I don't know who that person was. They were describing, it had nothing to do with me. And they were trying to build me up, taking the little few things I'd said, and then added a whole bunch more. Like, I'm not doing that. So I never did it once. I just it's not for me.
Yeah, a lot of, and you raise an interesting point. I mean, a lot of those psychic websites, that charge you by the minute, that they're totally phony. But there is a difference between being a psychic and being a medium, because there are people that have the ability to communicate mind to mind, with another living being, but they can't communicate, with a discarnate, with somebody that's in the spirit world. So you can be an accomplished psychic, but have no mediumship ability at all. And so I know a lot of people use the terms interchangeably. They go to a medium and then they'll tell their friend I went to a psychic, but there is a difference between the two. Now, mediumship is still, as far as we can tell, a telepathic process. It's still mind-to-mind communication. It's just that one of the parties involved, the person in the spirit world, doesn't have a body anymore, but their mind or their consciousness, still exists. And that's why mediums are able to do what they do.
Yeah, and I think my stuff isn't for like somebody I don't know or somebody on the street. It's a family member. It's somebody involved or nearby that I'm passing. Something is not. I can tell you're gonna win the lottery in 7 days.
Yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions.
It's interesting. So other than you have the radio show, now what do you have? You say you have like doctors and scientists on there, and are they discussing psychic phenomena? Can say it.
No, I mean, it does. I mentioned, we work with them in different universities, and they're on our board and they offer us, some advice. But we have on our website, some of the scientists have blogs that they write, and that's under our afterlife science section of our website, and people can log into, individual blogs that are written. And sometimes they'll speak at our conferences or, retreats and so forth. But, it's important for us to show that there are very credible people, you know, that have worked in this area for decades. And even though their work is not known to the mainstream, or it's not even accepted by a lot of their colleagues, and yet they've been doing, I mean, as you probably know, Ian Stevenson, was doing reincarnation research for 40 years at the University of Virginia, and now that's taken over by Dr. Jim Tucker, and in the near-death experience community, Bruce Grayson has been, who's on our board, has been doing, also decades of wonderful NDE research. And so, these are not only anecdotal accounts, these are accounts that have been researched and backed up by science.
With all those connections and research, is there anything that really stands out to you right now that's, wow, this is new, this is amazing, this is cutting edge, this is something?
Yeah, of course, I don't have to tell you, but, because of the advances in technology, in the near-death experience community, we have a lot more, we can do a lot more research because the resuscitative techniques have improved, keep improving throughout the years. So we can bring back a lot of people, that have physically died. I always found, out of all the disciplines of research, I always found NDEs to be the most compelling, perhaps the most compelling evidence, because, I mean, the person meets every definition of death that medical science, defines, with no heartbeat, no respiration, no brain waves, no reflexes, et cetera. I mean, physically dead. And yet, they experience these clear and lucid, have these clear and lucid experiences, which they wouldn't have if it was a product of hallucinations due to lack of oxygen and so forth. I mean, these are not fragmented, different bits and pieces. People see deceased loved ones. They have, clear thinking. They, can describe the environment. They have a life review, and so, I mean, I always, I think, it offers a wonderful exploration and, into life after death. I can't say that there's anything cutting edge or new that's happened. Although today, a lot of people are doing research, with brain mapping, and they're trying to see if there are areas in the physical brain that are affected when somebody's engaged in these non-physical experiences, whether that be mediumship or meditation, and so forth. And the hope there is that if we can identify how these things take place, maybe we could make it accessible to all of us instead of only the superstars, that can do these things. The other thing that I find,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say the other thing that I find really compelling is the deathbed visions, because, we've talked to many medical doctors that are administrators in hospice, and it's well known, in hospice setting, is that in the hours, either the hours before death or several weeks before physical death, people have these experiences where they see deceased loved ones that come seemingly to escort them to the other side. And, the person reaches out, has conversations with, smiles, is comforted by it. And I believe that we all have escorts to the other side. We may not be in a position physically or mentally, to be able to communicate that to loved ones that are sitting with us, but they take place nonetheless. I've experienced it personally with my family members. So I think that has tremendous spiritual implications, that we all are being watched over, and we have help when it becomes our time to cross.
Was that what you were talking about a while ago, the God spot? I think they called it for a while, that they were finding on MRIs.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, one of the researchers termed it, and then it could be. I mean, some people think that the pineal gland is the, the center of these communications that we have with the world that's not visible. There's a researcher, medical doctor, Dr. Rick Strassman, who years ago wrote some books, and he's still doing research on he wrote a book called the DMT molecule, and DMT has a hallucinogenic properties, and we all have it in our brains, possibly in the pineal gland. And not only do we all have it, but plants have it and other species have it. And if you stop to think, why is that? Why would, if we're all part of this grand design, why would we be designed with this holotropic type of substance in our brains? What purpose does it serve? And you could surmise that maybe that purpose is to give us the ability to communicate with these other dimensions and other worlds. I mean, the ancients seemed to do it on a regular basis. There were ages of mysticism that lasted for tens of thousands of years. And you can argue that the leaders of today's organized religions came out of those ages of mysticism, where they regularly commune with their ancestors and they receive, information, telepathically. So I think it might be a case where today all this stuff has been weaned out of us due to the scientific revolution and all of these influences that we have, cultural influences, societal influences, academic influences. So maybe we'll progress by relearning what we once knew, in ancient times.
And what you said about the plants and animals, a lot of NDEers say when they first get to heaven, the flowers spoke, communicated, the trees, the grass, everything was alive.
Yeah, absolutely. And they describe the synesthesia, where all the senses are combined, into one, and you could taste music, or you could taste colors, and so everything is all combined, and that, as you mentioned, that's commonly reported in NDEs.
It really makes you feel like you're trapped in a meat suit that,
Yeah, right.
Once you're out, you're going to experience so much, and we're in these cans.
Yeah, and we have to come to the realization, as you said, that we all have these cans, and that but that's not our true self. This physical existence is one little blip in a continuum of life. Now, you could argue, what is our purpose here? And perhaps this physical existence is the only place that we can get a tremendous amount of growth by facing all these adversities, and how, maybe the way in which we react to everything that's put before us affects our growth and position, once we transition from here. But, I try to, I know for myself, I say to myself all the time, I have to remember that everything is temporary in this physical world. We keep thinking everything is permanent, where it's instilled upon us. Everything is wrong. It's kind of absurd when you think about it. Everything is permanent, and yet we're on this spinning orb that's traveling 1,000 miles in space. It's anything but permanent, or solid, and that's why we grieve. We grieve because of the finality, what we perceive as the finality of death. But if we can come to know that death is not final, that this is just a temporary blip, that we will be reunited with our deceased loved ones again, it becomes easier to navigate our physical lives and face all these challenges.
And we're these love beings, and the more we love, the more we're going to hurt here on earth. The more we love someone and we lose them, the more we're going to hurt.
Yeah, that's that's the bottom line. We grieve because we love. If we didn't love, we wouldn't grieve. And it's more than that. I mean, in the other dimensions, where these entities of energy and thought, and emotion, and those get transmitted energy and thought, it appears get transmitted through the conduit is energy, and that energy might be love. So the more we love, the easier it may be for our deceased loved ones to make a connection, and and to the physical world from where they are.
Yeah, sometimes I hear these stories and I think, love defied the laws of nature in that situation. When, the deathbed visions or whatever. And I had an experience that made me think, okay, I can convince myself something isn't real except for this one thing. And that is when my son was 20, for the first time ever, I told the story about when he was 5 years old. He was at a New Year's Eve party at his house, and he was in the kitchen making a drink with his girlfriend. And I told his cousin and his friends that was staying there. And it's the only time I ever told it, I don't know what brought it up, but he was 5 years old. We were getting ready to build a house, and the three boys was out playing in the woods. We were focused, my husband and I were focusing on the spot where we were going to build. And we're letting the boys play, and we had just bought the property, and there's a creek, but it was only ankle deep. But I had forgot we'd had a lot of rain and melting snow. So we're standing there concentrating on where to put the house. The boys are playing, beautiful Easter Sunday. And all of a sudden, my 6-year-old Matthew yells, "Mom, Jeremy!" My heart sunk. That scream, no parent ever wants to hear. And my husband took off running. I was frozen in fear and I couldn't move. And I just started praying, "Dear God, please don't take my Jeremy." And I was praying, my son Jeremy, I was praying for twins at the time, which later I died, had near-death experience a week later. And from an ectopic pregnancy. But so I'm standing there frozen in fear, crying, and I start praying to God, because I need to be with my son right now, not in the time it took my feet to get down there and look for him. And I said, "Dear God, please don't take my baby." And I'm praying. And then all of a sudden, I'm outside my body, just like I had been at my 5-year-old drowning, which I hadn't remembered yet. There's outside my body, but I'm outside in that space, that realm. And I'm now praying to Jeremy, because now I have on the other side, we have all that knowing knowledge. And I now know what happened. He fell in the creek. It's not that deep, but it is swift, and it's kind of deep because of all the rain, the melting snow. And he's trying to swim instead of just stand up and walk out of there. He's panicked. And I say, "Jeremy, calm down. It's not that deep. Stand up and walk out of there." So I'm telling this story. Jeremy, now he's 20. He walks out of that kitchen with his drink and he says, "Mom, I heard you praying." Like, we're all like, our mouths drop. "What?" He said, "That's what it was." He said, "I was trying to swim because I panicked and I heard you praying. So, Jeremy, stand up. It's not that deep. Walk out of there and put your feet down, walk out." And that's what he did. And we're all, every mouth is hanging open. And I think back at that and I'm like, people could, even family members, anybody knows, we could say, "Oh, Peggy's making this stuff. Peggy's crazy." But nobody can deny that. Because
Right.
my son, who would not tell a lie if his life depended on it, would, and he's an accountant for the federal government, he's not one of these boo-boo people. That did happen. I heard Mom praying.
Yeah.
And I was praying silently way up on a hill while he's underwater in a creek.
Yeah, just tells you something about the nature of consciousness, and how it can be everywhere all at once, and I mean, you obviously, had that close, extremely close, bond and relationship, and that maybe these close bonds actually increase the ability to be able to communicate, thoughts, back and forth. It seems that way, with siblings and family members, as opposed to, even though it takes place with total strangers. But it's interesting when you think about it, that all of our thoughts get transmitted, out to the universe, whether or not they're acknowledged or heard or accepted is another matter. But you have all these, the research for years regarding ESP and clairvoyance and telepathy and remote viewing, was incredible. In remote viewing, people can send their consciousness out to a distant location, be in that location, view it, and then make accurate drawings about what they see. And sometimes the drawing that they make is something that no longer exists, and it existed in the past. And sometimes it's something that doesn't exist now, but it will exist in the future. So it transcends time. Our notion of time is limited, by our, these physical laws. So it's unbelievable when you think of the power, of our minds. And when I say minds, our minds can act independently of our physical brains. So even though when our brains are no more and it's released from that can, when our soul or our consciousness or our mind is released from that can, we continue on, with our personalities and our memories for the most part intact.
That was a hard thing for me. In both my NDEs, I experienced forward, backward in time, and that, and being in more than one place at once. And, to remember a 5-year-old journey, which I didn't remember until after the 25-year-old ectopic pregnancy, a week after that, Easter Sunday. And I all of a sudden got this download, look up the sky, like a movie screen, and I watched the drowning from front to back. My family confirmed, yeah, you did, you drowned. But to have those memories then, once I remember the drowning, as years go by, like, I can't tell anybody this. I don't even make sense of it, because you were here and then you were there, but I think I was here too. And how did that happen? And I don't know what happened first, but it seemed like it happened all at once. And so,
yeah, it's like, it's something that you and your fellow NDEers are challenged with. I mean, how do you put such an experience into language? That's why everybody says it's ineffable. I mean, there is no language that can really communicate what you experience. And I could imagine that must be tremendously frustrating, and also, as you mentioned, you have that additional fear of being judged, that, you're making this stuff up when it's real.
yeah, for me, it was, I had to come to terms and believe it myself before I could tell it and expect anybody else to believe it. I had to be sure first. And that took decades of, I don't get it. And then I started understanding. It's like pieces of puzzle. And I started seeing all the connections. I'm like, that's the only conclusion to come to, because this is real. It's the only thing that makes sense. The memories never leave. And this dot connects to that dot, connects to that dot. And you just start to see this master plan. Has anyone thought of making something where NDEers are certified, like mediums?
Oh, yeah, I've never heard that. And I don't know how you would go about that. I mean, how can you judge somebody else's experience? It'd be really, really difficult. It's like with mediums, I can evaluate the evidence, because a piece of information is either right or wrong, or you don't know, maybe. So, but with an NDE, it's kind of hard. And in the NDE community, like you were saying, I mean, there are people that try to take advantage of the situation and, embellish and, or make up things. And then there are some that have these truly profound, experiences. And I wouldn't even know how to go about, separating the two. But
I interviewed a guy named Randy, and he is former deputy director of Ohio, which I live in Ohio. He lives in Florida now, but former deputy director of Ohio Peace Officer Academy. And he had an NDE. He's military, 20 years in the military, and homicide detective. And he had to see the proof. He didn't believe in things. He wasn't particularly Christian. I mean, he went to church a couple times a year with his wife or something, but he had an NDE, and he got the evidence he needed.
yeah,
And he got, I'm like, evidence that you could prove in court, because he met a guy in heaven that was on a porch making flags, red, white, and blue flags. And he told Randy, Randy didn't know this guy. He says, tell my granddaughter, Madison, that her grandpa's okay. And so when he had died of COVID, he only had 3% chance to live. And this just happened last year. And so, months go by, and he's learned to do everything again. And he told his daughter, hey, I need a haircut. He says, I got a business card back there, barber shop, just, look on there and call me, make me an appointment. And she knew his story. And she says, Dad, she got the card. Did you see the name on the back of this card? He says, what are you talking about? Just make me an appointment. She says, Dad, it says Madison on the back. He says, make me an appointment with her. And he met her, and that was her grandpa. He was a well-known veteran for helping other veterans. And he would sit on his white Porsche, White House, like they described, and he would go take the family, I don't know, it was Veterans Day or something, and make these red, white, and blue flags. But she said, that beautician said, and she's getting ready to marry a doctor, this beautician, and she's not even from there. She's from another state, and she just moved there just by chance that, she would be there. And she says, it's not the first time that Grandpa sent a message to an NDE to our family. Her mother got a message from a guy that was in a motorcycle accident. And he says, I have all the proof. I have the evidence.
Yeah. It's a personal knowing. I always say, belief in an afterlife, it starts with this vague hope. A lot of people say they believe in an afterlife, but they've really never seen any evidence. They just hope there's an afterlife. And some people, move into that believing stage. And then others, if they're lucky, move into that knowing stage, and it's like a personal cognitive behavior process based upon what you've learned. Something that you said stuck out. You said when you had to put all of the pieces together, and then eventually, it was the only thing that made sense, and I believe that on a broader perspective, because in all the things that we, study, it's easy to dismiss any one of them. Okay, you can, despite all the evidence, you could not believe in mediums and you dismiss it, or maybe you don't believe in near-death experiences. You think it's a product of a dying brain and you dismiss that, or you don't believe in deathbed visions, or you don't believe in reincarnation and blah, 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 and you keep going. But when you step back and you look at the entire body of evidence, the thing that makes the most sense, the only thing that makes sense, is that we survive our physical bodies. So you have to be exposed to all of the evidence. Some people are lucky to have a profound personal experience, and that's how they get to that knowing stage. You're at that knowing stage because you're an experiencer. Others never really have that profound experience, but yet they get to that place by being exposed to all of the information. So I think there's two pathways to that. One is through the evidence and one's through a personal experience.
One through faith and one through evidence.
Right. And to some people, blind faith is enough. That's fine. To others like me, it wasn't enough for me. I needed the evidence part of it. And eventually it clicks.
When I realized that with my son, that was a real event, that we communicated like that, I thought to myself, and I still think, if I can save my son through thought, I want everybody to be able to. Because I envision a day where maybe one of my grandkids is missing and we can't find them. If people knew how to tap into that kind of thought, we could find out where that child is. Because this exists, if it exists for me, it exists for everyone, and we know hardly anything about it, how to tap into it, how to use it. And my thing is, that keeps me going, is that happened. And if it can happen for me, it can happen for others if we just learn how. And I wish that every university would open up a department to study these things, because, we have our seeing, hearing, taste, you have all these senses, but when you have an NDE and you come back, now you have the senses that you gained over there, because we probably didn't have telepathic communication until we were over there, because over there, you experience the timelessness, the time shift, you experience the telepathic communication, you levitate. There's all the ways over there. I call it the language of heaven when we're out of this can. And there's no reason we can't learn to touch the heavens here.
And, perhaps, Peggy, that's the meaning of our physical existence, is to pierce that veil and gain some recognition of what's to come, you know.
I want to stab it and rip it open.
Yeah.
We're all impatient.
Yeah.
We don't want to wait to die and see. We all want to know right now.
I know that's the truth, because we all want to be able to do it.
Yeah. I mean, after my tubal pregnancy, all of a sudden I started saving lives. I just heard this child crying at a picnic one day. Nobody else heard it. And I walked out into a field. Here's a little boy, a little taller, face down in a ditch, drowning. He was barely moving. I picked him up. And that was in 1986. And in 2010, I was a counselor. And this great big guy come through and he sat in my chair. We're chit-chatting. And I looked at his last name and I remembered it from that reunion. And a distant relative. And I said, I mentioned them reunions. And I told that story for the very first time. And he leaned back in his chair, this great big guy. And he said, that was you? He said, that was my little brother. He swears to this day an angel saved him. He's like, I can't wait to tell my mom. We now know who it is, and etc. And I'm like, how? Twice I told the story for the very first time, and bam, I got a confirmation of something I've always wondered about but never talked about. Yeah. But then, so then that was the first time, and that was 2 months after I lost the twins because I was pregnant again. And when I pulled that little boy up, I miscarried. And so then not long after that, we're going down the road, our three boys in the back seat, my husband's driving and just kind of looking out the window. And all of a sudden I told my husband, stop. I said, pull over. He's like, what? I said, I got to go in that house. He's like, what? I didn't know who was in that house. I had to go right now. And it never happened before or since. I knocked on the door and it was my ex-sister-in-law that answered. And I thought, as I'm walking to the door, this is so crazy, but I have to do it. When somebody comes to the door, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, this is the wrong house. But my sister-in-law home in the house. I'm like, what are you doing here? My ex-sister-in-law. This is my sister's house. She's written this house. I'm babysitting my nephew. I said, where's he at? And she's in the bed. I said, take me to him. He was in there choking Easter basket grass. And she's kind of learning disabled. She says, if you hadn't been there, I wouldn't have known what to do. And while I have this boy upside down in the bathtub running water, and why I did that, I don't know, to get my fingers wet and reach up there and get that grass, she's looking through the phone book, because this is 1986, looking for the number where her sister's at to tell her she can't handle babysitting him. He's too much for her. She wouldn't have known what to do. So it was just like one little thing after the other. And then I started working at Children's Services doing investigations. My first month there, I walked in this apartment building with a guy that was training me. And I walked over to this baby and I'm like, this baby's in serious trouble. And he's like, what are you talking about? That baby's fine. Long story short, it was dying of failure to thrive, severely dehydrated. It was just like one thing after the other. Why I worked at Children's Services then. And I never thought, oh, I'm psychic. I never once. I was so busy. I ended up with they gave me 75% of the cases. That's what happens.
Yeah.
But
well,
it would just be interesting to have some kind of somewhere to start with NDE or some kind of checklist, because honestly, I have met some, and after getting to know them a while, I find out they're pathological liars.
Yeah.
And when they're caught in a lie, they're like, what's it matter? What's it matter that it's a lie? It matters everything.
Yeah. People are people. I mean, every experiences, every profession, mediums, doctors, lawyers. I mean, people, you're going to find the good and the bad, it's a question of, how do you separate the two? Yeah, and then going back to all your stories, I mean, we know that a high percentage of near-death experiences, return with enhanced psychic ability. Maybe that's because, they've seen, they've visited the world of thought, and where everything is a world of thought, so they come back with that. But, your experience is not unique when you consider that a great many, experiences report similar things, So it's, and I attributed that to being immersed in that other world, whereas the rest of us have not yet.
Well, I appreciate so much that you and the other researchers, everything you've done, because it's made it possible for NDEers like me to gain an understanding into our experiences and to finally get a voice and say, hey, this is true, this happened, this is real. And we got some science to back us up. We're not looking like witches, weirdos, mentally ill as much as we used to.
Right. It's a battle we all constantly fight, you know. Eventually we'll change worldview about all these things, but it's a process.
And it's wonderful that what you're doing to help people with grief.
Thank you.
And I'm so sorry that now you have your own grief to deal with after everything you've done for everybody. Your wife must have been a saint.
Yeah, you know, she really was the true founder of the foundation. So it's a little strange. You know, she's gone a year now, but I'm learning. There was a reason why she kept telling me to pay more attention to what she was doing, and now I know why. But you know, I'm learning. Fortunately, she put all of the pieces in place. I mean, all the programs and everything. So I just have to plug it in, and we're doing fine.
Did she ever write a book or do a video or anything?
She didn't write a book, but she was a copious note taker. She was also intuitive, and she constantly, every day, notes and notes and notes. And in going through all her stuff, I've uncovered some of these deep thoughts that she would have about the meaning of life and the nature of the soul and the afterlife, and some of them are very profound. So maybe someday I'll put those together in a book. I mean, one of the things. Yeah, one of the things that she was helping me to write my medium explosion book, and I'm kind of lazy and I put that aside. But near the end, that's one of the things she was able to communicate to me. She says, "You better get your ass in gear and and finish that book." So
Medium explosion.
It's called The Medium Explosion, and it's a book about the process of mediumship, and I also include a lot of personal experiences, that I've had that's backed up, by the research. So it's kind of a mixture. But I wrote that book to address some of the things that we were talking about, about what's going on in the mediumship world.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time and come to talk to me.
I appreciate being with you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.